Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe, Giannis, and I, boy, do we have a special guest today. CrossFit legend, founder of Park City Fit, husband, father, and just total badass, Chris Spealler. That's right. The legend is on the show. And man, I could talk to Chris time and time again. We need him to be like one of our multiple guest episodes because I just feel like we barely even scratched the surface today.
Yeah, man. I mean, I mentioned this on the podcast too, but it's fun to get with these like CrossFit legends. You obviously being one of them that I remember like watching YouTube videos and stuff. We actually pull a really funny one up during the podcast, that hotel workout. That was a fun one to look at. But yeah, man, these are fun. They're fun because, you know, you guys are OGs that I looked up to in the CrossFit space, but then it's extra fun when we start talking about stuff that isn't so in the weeds of fitness. Like we do a little bit of the like throwback and the stories, Camp Pendleton, the hotel workout, but really getting into like the parenting stuff and like what he has going on with the kids. Like that's the stuff that's really interesting. And that I hope, you know, our hope with this podcast is that we're hopefully having conversations with these awesome guests that are different than all the other stuff that they're recording, like really talking to them about stuff that they're super passionate about that isn't just, you know, rehashing, you know, the last decade of the CrossFit Games. So I thought it was great, man. I think people are going to love it.
Yeah. I thought what he said about this idea of like kind of being, for lack of a better term, like open or humble with your kids about having tough days. And then, you know, being also open-minded to letting them know like, hey, like if you do make a mistake, letting them know and apologizing. I thought that particular part of the conversation I found to be very, very powerful. The way that he speaks about certain things I thought was very organic, very natural, the way that he really feels. And I loved it, man. So, you know, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that we have a lot of incredible guests on. If you're new to the show, go back, check out the other episodes, right? We spend a lot of time and energy on these. We really want to try and add as much value to ourselves selfishly by learning from these guys, but also letting other people know. So if you haven't, go back, check out the other episodes, enjoy this one. And as per usual, simple ask, rate and review. It does a ton for the podcast, and getting that feedback from you guys really gets Gabe and I fired up. So without any further ado, let's dive into a great episode with Mr. Chris Spealler. All right, after some technical difficulties, we are ready to rock and roll. Chris Spealler, really appreciate you being on the show. As we talked about in the intro, you know, you're just a legend of the sport of CrossFit. I've always looked up to you as one of the guys who really laid the framework, who always put in the work, and who, as far as I'm concerned, always had a way of doing things I didn't think were physically capable. You know, you were the guy who came in smaller than other guys, and even at the time, a little bit older, not crazy older, but a little bit older, right? With all due respect. And you always found a way to get the work done, man. You always found a way to qualify for the games. You always found a way to put the weight up, and it's always been inspiring. And so, dude, I guess a good place to start is like, Chris, like, talk to us about what's going on today. And then we're going to go back and talk about a bunch of other stuff. Because you have 2 kids, you're married, you got a gym, you got all the things. What's going on with you right now?
Yeah. It's funny. I was just getting back from like a bike ride last night with my son, and I was like, there's so much stuff I want to do that I feel like I don't have time to do. Like, and like fitness is the avenue to do that stuff. But, you know, I've got 2 almost teenage kids, 1 teenager, almost a teenager. So just trying to like embrace that. Right. And as you know, time with kids goes really quick. So I'm trying to be present and in the moment. My son loves mountain bike racing, downhill, dirt jumps, stuff like that, gravity based. So I enjoy doing that with him. Daughter, she's like this super confident little thing that kind of doesn't need sports, but she could be good at anything. So taking them on adventures is really fun. Trying to kind of figure out the summer right now with a couple of trips. Might be going to Idaho, might be going to Whistler. And then we're going to try to tag on maybe a little trip to Europe with the Invitational. That's like the real present stuff. But yeah, like, you know, me, I love riding my mountain bike. I love dirt biking. I love skiing powder. I love jiu-jitsu. Like those things are so great. And I wish I had more time to do all of it.
Dude, you're talking my language, by the way. I'm so happy that you've gotten into jiu-jitsu. There's so much parallel here, dude. I just can't wait to dive into some of this stuff because I used to race BMX bikes. I'm like all about this lifestyle. But speaking of which, I guess a place to start that I would like to start, and Gabe, obviously, add in where you want, I'm curious with the kids and with your son mountain biking. I see you guys doing that together. And one of the things that we talk about on this show that's really important to Gabe and I is this idea of train to protect and provide. And what that means to me is protect is, having the fitness to run, jump, climb, lift, do all the things you might need to do. Also, obviously, if needed, fight. But provide is this idea that like, dude, I never want to get too old where I can't say yes to my kids. We want to go do the thing. And I think you're like literally the embodiment of that. Like you are out doing the thing with the kids, and being able to provide these experiences because you have the fitness to do so is so critically important. So I'm curious how your training has evolved to be able to do those things with your son and with your daughter in particular.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. Cause that's like a super important thing to me is facilitating that. And I don't think my kids really recognize that. I think they're just like, oh, dad, like whatever. But I feel like I'm kind of a cool dad, guys. Like most dads aren't doing the stuff that we do, but they'll connect dots later on. But I mean, training looks, I would like to say eerily similar, but wildly different. Like I am a huge believer now in varied intensity. I am a believer in structured weightlifting and not just varied weightlifting. And I'm a believer in self-assessing every day to see how I feel and having the maturity and the knowledge to adjust on a daily basis so that I can do those things, so that I can not have the time in the gym. And let's just be honest, like the adaptation of the soreness outside of the gym, the work, the volume affect the things I want to do outside. So right now, generally, I lift twice a week. I typically do that on Monday and then Saturday mornings. Monday is like a pretty big core type day, like core lifting day. I'm doing like a lower body, upper body split and some accessory work. Saturdays, I like to do a lot of unilateral work. So single leg, single arm. I honestly just get creative and have fun with it and make things challenging. I do 1, maybe 2 longer duration workouts throughout the week where they tend to be 45 to 90 minutes. Sometimes that's inside the gym. Sometimes that's just riding my mountain bike. And then I usually allocate 2 days, maybe 3, to like pushing the pace and having something where you would, consider it kind of like that classic high power output CrossFit type workout. And that allows me to kind of adjust the rest of my week so that I can usually try to roll 3, if I can, 4 days a week, but 3 times a week is a good sweet spot for me. I ride my bike as I wish, which generally I would say is 3 days a week. And then dirt bike as I can. That's kind of summertime. So that in-gym structure allows me to do the things outside in a very recreational sense.
I'm curious when you talk, first of all, these episodes are always like super fun to me because I'm kind of like an outsider looking in. Like I was such a big fan of Jason and you. And I think one thing that both of you have in common actually is I think both of you became very big fan favorites because I tell Jason this all the time. I give him a hard time that he always made the hard work look really hard because, he wasn't like the most like, some guys just make it look effortless.
Yeah.
Like, Jason just looked like he was fucking working hard, like he was just the guy that you were like, that guy is
right there. I think
suffering out there. Yeah, you give me backhanded compliments all the time. But I mean, Chris, like you were, as a smaller athlete myself, like you were just the guy that like we were all just rooting for because you weren't the biggest guy out there. And I remember the squat clean ladder. I forget what year, but the squat clean ladder in the Coliseum with just like people going crazy. And I forget what the weight was. It's crazy how much heavier the weights have gotten, but just that last bar and you getting under it. So anyway, before asking my question, just wanted to kind of give both of you a shout out for being legends of the sport. But when I hear you kind of describe one thing, I always like when different guests that we have say the same thing, but a little differently. Like I like those commonalities because then I know that there's something there and something people can take away. And what you were saying, we had a guest on recently that the way he coined it was striking when the iron's hot, right? Like really getting to the point where intuition with training is so important. And there are days where you are going to feel like, hey, I'm ready to chew concrete today.
Yeah.
I'm going to go in there and hit it hard. And there are some days where you might have had plan A going into the gym, but like you have to be, mature enough in your training and in knowing why you're training to like, hey, today's just not a day to go heavy. Today I'm going to completely scrap what I was going to do and maybe go ride my mountain bike, whatever. And I think that is so important. But ultimately, getting to my question, your split and kind of how much of that is because of the background you have of being a competitive athlete for so long and maybe now having to course correct versus what maybe the average person needs going into it. Because one thing we've also heard from a different guest is like, like the whole zone 2 and doing aerobic and doing some days easier than others, maybe for some people ends up being, for lack of a better word, an excuse to avoid intensity, which is really what they need. So how do you kind of balance that? Like what you're describing as your split now versus what maybe the average person needs?
I honestly think it's better. And I mean that in the best of ways. Like the training methodology that we did and the way that we did it was generally new, right? And I think it was largely, and I mean this in the most respectful and best way, experimental, right? Like we were pushing the envelope, asking these questions of, can we do this for 20 years? I don't know. Let's find out. And I say this all the time on podcasts or in conversations, and we know the answer to that. You can't. You can't do it for 20, 30 years sustainable. You can't go in the gym and work out 6 days a week and have every single workout be 15 minutes or less where you're just absolutely laying yourself out. And I think if the goal is to build a really well-rounded athlete, that approach builds more of an anaerobic athlete. And if I want to build a well-rounded athlete, I think tapping into those other energy pathways more frequently for everybody from beginner to elite level athlete is arguably a better approach. Now, we could still say that, these adages or these kind of cliche type things where we say, needs don't vary by kind, but by degree, we could sort of apply that, right? Where if someone's trying to go to the CrossFit Games, they need more volume, they need more intensity, they need more weightlifting, but guess what they also need? They need more sustained effort work. They need more zone 2 work. And you see athletes doing that. Like there's a reason why people are both winning a 6 or 10 mile run and doing, outstanding on a heavy clean ladder, right? Is there's an introduction or infusion into that. A beginner athlete that comes into the gym to see me, yes, I do agree with that comment that sometimes that can be an excuse for not touching intensity. But if you educate someone, what I think it does is if you give them the opportunity to have self-regulating, which most people don't have the maturity or knowledge to do that. They need to be assigned a workout that tells them the level of intensity, or it's written with that in mind. And the reason why I think that's important is so that we can have days that have intensity. So when I brief the workouts at the whiteboard, we talk about the way the week lays out. And even today, it was a 15-minute EMOM that was designed to be higher power output. But tomorrow, it says it on the whiteboard, is a zone 2 workout. So when I brief the workout, I'm like, today is the day you should push. If you feel good, today's the opportunity to really light it up because tomorrow we have this. And so I think that if we can educate people and help them understand the value of training those energy pathways more effectively, that actually allows for more intensity when they do it, more recovery, way more longevity, and a broader adaptation. And that's just like the reality of it is, guess what I'm doing? Experimenting as well. But if we want this movement to improve, I think people have to step out and try that stuff. We have to try things differently and see if it works better. Because like, hey, that was kind of like the principle all along.
Yep.
It's like,
and regularly play sports, right? I think we've gone out the window of that. Like that's gone out. Like that's gone. I don't know how many people there are in the CrossFit space who just only train inside the gym. And I just think it's so imperative to get outside the gym, to go do other things. It's only going to fire you up to keep going to the gym.
Yeah. And we were there. Like, I totally get it. Right. Like it sucks you in, and it's like the personality, and it's like the, you know, like the driven, it's the results, and it's the progression. But what I've found is what I'm really addicted to is progression. And that's a lot of what, you know, CrossFit gave me is I'm able to see my times, my loads, my numbers, But guess what? I'm 45, and guess what? All my times, my loads, my number, they're all slower. And it doesn't mean the portions of the program are ineffective. It means I'm 45 and I'm not 28 anymore. And it also means that, like, I want to go play outside. And so that, like, yeah, I just think that it's such an easy way to fall into that, but there's way more longevity to progression when you do stuff you suck at, like ride a dirt bike or try to get good at jiu-jitsu or
tactical games. Like,
tons to do.
I got so many things I got to ask you. So that bike behind you, is that from from Camp Pendleton?
That is. I kept that bike. I took that sucker on the plane. That's from Pendleton. Dude,
so Camp Pendleton, so if you're not watching this online and you're probably listening, he has a bike hanging on the back wall, and I could see it from a mile away. I knew exactly what that bike was, and it's a single speed Trek, if I'm not mistaken.
Or it's a red line.
Red line, single speed red line. And they had 3 sizes of bikes when we show up at Camp Pendleton. It's like small, medium, large, pick your bike. And I came from like a BMX mountain biking background. I'm trying to get all fancy with it. Sure enough, and Chris, I don't know if you agree with this, but the Camp Pendleton was in Southern California. And so I was able to drive the bike home, which was nice. But you start off with a swim, then you did a bike, then you did a run. I remember telling myself, bro, a bike, I'm going to smash this. Yes. But the bike was like, the bike was like 800 meters, like single speed. We couldn't do anything on the bike. Yeah.
I remember like Austin Stack and we get to these downhills and Austin would just take off because he just weighs more than me. I was like, I can't pedal fast enough. I can't do anything. I'm just going to sit here and like wait until I get to a hill and try to catch up to it. It's so funny.
But the best part about that whole event, well, there's 2 things about that event real quick. The first one is I was in a pack of guys riding down this hill, and there was 2 scored events. So event number 1 was bike and swim and bike. Yeah. Event number 2 is the run. So what happened is when you ditched your bike, you had to sprint maybe, I don't know, what do you think, 100 meters to the first line? So dude, all these guys were on our bikes. We just ghost ride them, just boom, just let them go. And we're just sprinting. And then we get to this finish line and everybody just falls.
Totally.
And then we go for another 10 miles. And then that's where you cramped up. Remember I found you walking backward?
Dude, it was so devastating. I remember you offering to carry me. I was like, no, you will not carry me. I will finish this.
So, but just for the record, so that everybody knows I'm not an asshole, is because I had such a moral dilemma going into that situation. I'm jogging, right? And I see you ahead of me. So of course you're my competitor and you're walking back. I'm like, what the fuck is going on, Chris? And I'm like jogging. I'm like, hey man, like what's going on here? Like, dude, I'm really cramping. And in that moment, I thought to myself, I looked around and there is nothing, no one, nothing. We're in the middle of the desert.
Totally.
And I'm like, fuck. I was like, dude, Chris is not in a good spot right now. I was like, what should I do? I was like, option A, I just forget that I even saw him.
Yeah.
Option B, I at least make a casual offer to help or whatever. And if he takes
still deny him if he says yes. Oh man. Oh yeah, there we go. And you know what's so funny is like on that note of zone 2, guess what? I was lacking. Dude, I was like an anaerobic machine that year because all I was doing was trying to be able to lift heavy loads, like rep after rep. And I didn't do any kind of long duration sustained effort. I bonked on a workout I should have won. So it's like that stuff has to be a part of people's training. It's not the holy grail. Like you hear people talking about that stuff all the time. Like, look, it's not complicated, right? Like, oh, exercise is good for people. Lifting weights and being strong is good. Like, duh, of course, right? But like, I don't know. I just think I think we can serve people better. And that's a good example of how and why, even for an elite athlete, right?
Oh man, so good.
That was gold right there.
Gabe, it was like,
those are some great memories.
Gabe, I'm telling you, man, it's like, I could not have scripted it better because we weren't like anywhere near anybody. I mean, you're in the middle of like these switchbacks and here's Chris look like he's going to die.
Dude. People were like, what's wrong with him? He's like laying in the woods. I can hear him like, oh. I asked Russell Berger.
Was I the only one that offered to pick you up and to help you?
Other people offered, but like not to carry me, but you did. Other people were like, you okay? And then Russell Berger was like a judge that year. And, he's like military ranger guy. And I was like, Russell, what do I do? I'm sitting on the dirt with both legs extended, hamstrings and quads cramped. And he's like, dude, you're done. Like you're too far behind the curve. And so I like peg leg my way for the next 3 miles. I like peg leg to finish the workout. And then one of the, I don't know what they are. He was a Marine, but he's like, he hooked me up to an IV and I was on the IV and then I could actually do the obstacle course. Cause it was like 2 hours after that.
Yeah.
Dude, that's bananas. So that's kind of the training side. Because you were cramping, this question kind of comes up. How much do you think the nutrition side has evolved since then, specifically, both for athletes and like what is kind of being recommended to general population now?
That's a good question. I don't really know that it's changed that much. Like you need to fuel, right? And I did, and I had like noon tablets in my water and I just bonked. I just didn't train right for it. Like that's what happened. I went too hard, too fast, and I bonked on the workout. So I don't think that nutrition has changed that much, especially when you think about just, prescriptions of eating real food and pay attention to how much. I think it's a pretty simple approach, but you can go down the rabbit hole for sure. I think more than ever, personally, I just encourage people, whatever they're trying to do, it should be sustainable. Like it's not, don't do the zone if it's not sustainable. Don't do paleo if it's not sustainable. For some people it might be, but if you've got 3 kids and you're, self-employed, chances are weighing and measuring every meal ain't going to work so well for you.
Yeah, I think that the thing that's changed the most is just the amount of like noise and conflicting information that's out there and distractions to what, everyone kind of intuitively knows they should be doing most of the time. And a lot of, to your point, like promised shortcuts that aren't sustainable and just mean that people, see some progress and then kind of like, it's 2 steps back, 2 steps forward kind of thing. Or 2 steps forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah, sustainability.
All right, we are taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about what we have going on in the month of June at Train Hard. So one of the things that's become increasingly apparent with what Jason has going on with the Train Hard Men's Club and just all these conversations we've been having on the podcast is that while there are some obvious physical benefits to training hard and fitness, it pales in comparison to the mental health benefits of working out, of training, and doing that alongside other people. So for the month of June, we have this shoulder to shoulder campaign going on. And what that is our effort to bring awareness to the specific challenges that men are facing when it comes to mental health. We have some awesome guests on the podcast for the month of June. We're talking about this in the newsletter, and we have a patch for sale on the Train Hard shop where all proceeds from that patch, so all proceeds from the shoulder to shoulder Train Hard patch, are going to be donated to Movember, a nonprofit that we're super stoked to be working with because they're doing some great work. Again, also bringing awareness to the challenges, but actually putting out programs and taking action to help solve and provide solutions for suicide prevention, helping deal with anxiety, depression, all these things that are super beneficial to men. So if you want to participate in that, if you want to support that cause, we're super fired up about it. You can go on the Train Hard shop for that shoulder to shoulder patch. All proceeds are going to go to Movember, or you can just share this podcast, share the newsletter, help us continue to have this conversation. But let's get back to the show.
Chris, how long have you and Sarah been together for?
Oh man, I think it'll be this August. I think it's 19 years.
Wow. Married 19.
Married 19 years. Yeah.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah,
I'm hitting my 15 year in about a month. So,
there we go.
yeah, together 23. And yeah, man, it's good. I want to ask, you've been on a journey and obviously we spent some time with your wife. You guys are both incredible. You guys seem to have a really good relationship. And, obviously you've gone through some, hardship in terms of like the gym and COVID and moving locations. And then you were traveling for seminars with CrossFit. And, obviously you and I have similar backgrounds in that sense, but I'm wondering from a relationship perspective, we could just touch base on that for a moment. I like talking about relationships. I think that there's always something we can learn from each other because everybody comes from it from a different perspective. So with you and Sarah and I know faith is obviously a component of your life. What types of things do you guys do to, maintain strong relationships, raise the kids? Because, dude, as life gets older, as the kids get older, as life gets whatever, it just becomes more challenging. So what type of advice do you have for these young bucks like Gabe, who just had a new baby like 2 weeks ago?
Yeah. It's interesting. Like Sarah's a rock star. I'd say it often. She's probably like the most selfless person I know. So back when we were competing, a lot of it was like our decision. It wasn't my decision to compete in the CrossFit Games. We would decide together, like, hey, are we going to do this again? Okay, let's do this again. So it was a group decision. And through all the business stuff and COVID and, building the building, should we not? Faith, a huge role in that, and leaning on that, like really praying about it. And what do we feel like God wants us to do, and listening to that and acting upon that in faith and trusting that. So that's a massive part, being on the same page with that, for sure. And then I think as your kids get older, what I think is like game changing, even from like a young age, it's just sort of depends on like how much you sort of crack open the door, letting your kids know when you're having a bad day and why. Like dad's not perfect. And if the kids see that and they're like, Dad, are you okay? It's okay to be like, you know what? I'm having a hard day. And they'll be like, well, why? And I might say, things at work are really hard. And well, why, Dad? Oh gosh, because, managing people's hard. Or it could be, I really care about what people think about the way that we program and the way that we run our classes. And a couple of people left the gym and it feels really personal to me. And so when you let kids in on that, I think it helps them realize that mom and dad aren't perfect. They don't need to be perfect. That's not the expectation. And you can just kind of share in that. And that's been really helpful for us to communicate as a family and figure out like also how does that work for them? So when they have a bad day at school or whatever, it's normal. It's normal to be like, hey, it's okay. It's okay that it was a hard day. So those things I think have been like a pretty big tenets of our relationship, and I would say that that's a huge one as a parent. And as a parent, asking for forgiveness when you need to, that's a tough one. But man, how often did you hear that from your parents when they screwed up? Like, hey, can you forgive me? But what if we do that as parents? Dude, that means a lot to your kid when mom and dad screw up. So those are things that I think are like pretty foundational for us.
Man, it's been super fascinating. So like Jason mentioned, we have a 17-month-old and I think she just turned 4 weeks. So we're in and here with two youngins, but it is fascinating how soon and how much they understand, because they really do. It's one thing that we've, heard from people that we've talked to, listen to podcasts, like read books, is just like really moving away from like baby talk and baby and all, like from a very early age, just literally having conversations about them. Obviously there's a point where like they don't know what you're saying, but I think that when you do that, you realize how soon they do understand and they do pick up on things like that, like just saying like, hey man, it's a hard day, and just being open with them from the beginning and not treating them like kids, even though obviously they are kids, but treating them more like, an equal part of your family unit. So I love hearing that from you, man, because it's something that we've tried to implement, as best we can. And obviously we don't get a lot back just yet, but I think it's more building the habit early on so that it's just kind of how you deal with this stuff later on. So appreciate you sharing that. It's definitely something we've noticed, even though, they're both super, super young right now.
Yeah, cool. Chris, it's so interesting. I mean, I'm picking up on three things with that, right? Having an aligned faith on what that journey looks like. And if you don't have faith, still being on the same page, I think is the key. You said something that's very specific to me, which is every year, Ash and I would have a conversation for many years about, hey, are we in this together or not? Like for the games, right? Because it's not me, it's us. And she makes just as many sacrifices, if not even more.
Oh, yeah.
And now that my kids, it's so funny. Now that my kids are getting older, Caden played in an all-star baseball game yesterday, and my heart rate's like at 300. It really puts into perspective the stress and anxiety that people that love you go through when you're in the middle of one of these sports. It's not just you, it's them too. But anyways, totally. So three things. And then the humility was the second one that I picked up on from you, which was really just sharing that you are having a tough day. And I think that the reason why that's powerful for me to hear is that there has been times, especially during COVID. COVID was really difficult for us because we were shutting down gyms left and right. It was just very difficult. And whether I realized it or not, I did bring probably not always the best energy into the room.
Sure.
And I think if I had been more forthcoming in the sense like, hey guys, like today, like we got served with the lawsuit or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It would have probably given more perspective of why I was being the way I was being. So that was a cool piece. And obviously like you got to take that with a grain of salt. What I'm hearing from you is like, obviously you don't want to like say you're having a bad day every day, but like just being more vocal about the way you feel is cool. Yeah. I didn't grow up that way at all.
Right. I think most of us didn't. Right. Like communication was garbage for most people.
Right. And then the third thing that you're saying, and I hate to regurgitate this, but I think this is just powerful. This is what I'm picking up on. Was this idea of like, dude, as a parent, you're not going to get it always right. And, I look back on my parents and they're wonderful, wonderful. I'm so blessed, but they've definitely evolved over the years. When I was younger, right, they probably did make some mistakes and some stuff that maybe at the moment, if they had just said, apologized or just like reconcile, like, hey, that was a mistake, it probably could have helped with overall relationships. And so I appreciate you sharing those kind of three tips. And I imagine a lot of that, your dad, I believe he passed away, if I'm not mistaken, about 2 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. 2 years ago. Yeah.
I remember meeting your dad and I remember seeing your dad. I remember you talking about your dad and you always held him in a very high regard. And I'm curious, like, were those lessons coming from your dad, right, wrong, or different? Like my dad, he came from Iran. He grew up in a different way, so he kind of raised me that way. I'm curious, what lessons your dad taught you that you're now either imparting or maybe making slight adjustments to with the modern day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like I've learned some really good things from my dad. One thing that my dad said to me when I was young, that stuck with me, and I think it was just from him. When it came to just like, like mentality, being an athlete person, he was like, hey, he's like, never compare yourself to anybody else because you'll only be as good as they are. And I was like, oh, that's a really good point. Like, if I'm just looking at others as something to aspire to be, what if that limits my potential? And so this idea of like, hey, you can do within reason, right? Because I've had this conversation with my son, like you can generally shoot and go for anything you want, but like, hey, bud, probably not the NBA, not a good idea, not a lot to work with here. So I'm honest with my kids like that, but if they say something, I'll be like, you could totally do that. So if Rourke says, even though I know it's just like a thought, if he says, I want to be a professional mountain bike racer, I'll be like, you could totally do that. Even though the chances are incredibly slim, I'm going to foster that mentality, right? And even if he changes his mind next week, it's fine, right? So that has been something that's really cool. The work ethic side, honestly, has been something I've had to adjust from. I grew up in a house, and I don't know if this is the way it was for you, Jason, but you start something, you finish it. You sign up for it, you show up for it. There's no excuse not to go to practice, to go to school, to like, you do the thing and you see it through at all costs. Like, Doesn't matter if you're having a bad day. It doesn't matter if you're overwhelmed at school. It doesn't matter if you don't feel well. You signed up, you go to practice, you bust your tail, you do the thing. And I grew up very much like that. And it took me probably 2 or 3 years to shift that mentality, because we're in a unique situation where my daughter really loves school. The public school system works really well for her, and we're super grateful for that. And she's not really driven to do sports. She's just like kind of a free spirit in a way. We'll try things for 2 or 3 months and then stop, and then try things and then stop. And she's just not interested in anything yet. Where my son, school is a terrible fit for him. And we actually had to make the decision this fall to pull him out because it was super unhealthy and he went online. So for him, he's really into sports. But what I learned is I couldn't assign the same approach and pressure to him or her, because it's not my daughter's personality and that wouldn't be good for her, and we can still encourage her to work hard and do things and see it through, but it just looks different. But for my son, we couldn't do that because if he was so overwhelmed by school, the sport thing would just tip him over the edge. So I've learned some days you just don't push. Some days it's not right to, at all costs, you show up and you do the thing. You have to listen to your kids, see how they're doing emotionally, see how they're doing mentally, and talk through that with them. Okay, why would it be important that you should go to practice? And for me, it's going to sound nuts, but it drove me crazy for 2 or 3 years when they would put up a fuss. I was like, no, you need to go. You signed up for it, because I correlated that with that's how I learned how to work hard. So that's how they're going to learn how to work hard. But there's a lot of ways to learn how to work hard. So, man, that was probably a really long answer for saying, I think that's where I've evolved as a parent, and being more inclusive with hey, what's going on within the family? I'm having a bad day and we're all okay. It's not the family's not falling apart. It's just hey, we're good. We're good, but it's just hard today and tomorrow's good, So I think those are probably the two big differences.
Man, it's such a balance there. It's such a balance. I always think about these things. I put myself in the shoes of how will I handle those situations when I get there? And there's so many parallels because my parents, I say were, immigrant parents, pretty strict, especially with school, they were very much grades are everything. And Jason has talked about this too, that's a big kind of immigrant parent thing. It's your education is everything. No one can take it away. And I've definitely, seen how, not that that's not true, but maybe your grades aren't everything. Education, learning is very different than going to school and learning. And it's so true what you were saying too, that school is a great fit, generally speaking, a little bit more for girls than for boys for a lot of reasons. Yeah. And there has to be some flexibility there. So, but it's a fine balance of, I think that it served me well in many ways, how strict my parents were with school. I learned a lot of skills that have been incredibly valuable to me in my career, and, writing, reading, all of these things, hard work, being very diligent about, getting things done on time, being task oriented, so on and so forth, that I would love my kids to have because they benefited me. Yeah. But how do you balance, those benefits that I had from, having pretty strict parents when it came to school with, recognizing that maybe it's not going to be a great fit for my son, or maybe he learns better in a different way, and not trying to put a square peg in a round hole. I think about that a lot, man. I think about it a lot. And I think it's a really fine balance.
Well, you hit on something too, Chris, you're talking about, hey, if you make a commitment to something, follow through with it. And I think it's so, look, some people might listen to this and be like, oh, I just think that in today's age, it's all about creating sound bites, right? And so the sound bite is, I never allow my kid to sign up for something and not finish it, right? Mm-hmm. That's the sound bite. Yeah. But the reality is, and I guarantee that same person who says that, there is always, there are, I think the expectation should be what I just said, but then we should be open-minded to exceptions to the rule. The rule should be,
Yes.
if you commit to something, you should follow through with it. That's the rule.
Yep.
But there are times where there's exceptions to the rule. And I think that, I think that's a good way for me when I look at it with my kids, like, dude, the expectation is this is what we're signing up for. You're committing to it. But, I think that I've probably done detriment, and I've had to course correct quickly, where you get someone into something, let's just say it's, I don't know, gymnastics or whatever it is, name the thing. And you're like, look, so you have like the conversation with the kid. Hey, we're going to sign up for this. It's going to be this commitment. Are you prepared to make that commitment? Right? You make the conversation.
Yeah.
But dude, sometimes like things happen, and it just, the juice isn't worth the squeeze to keep trying to force a square peg in a round hole. And because they might build resentment towards doing anything else in the future. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, that's a long-winded way of me saying, like, I appreciate your perspective on this, because it's more of a practical approach to parenting, in the sense of like, the expectation should always be that we're going to do the thing. But there's going to be exceptions to the rule sometimes,
Yeah. And like, what a privilege to be able to teach your kids how to critically think, because, instead of us just listening to the norm and listening to the thing. And I think, Jason, you get this as being, a business owner and an entrepreneur. Like, you have to think outside the box. You have to like chart your own path sometimes. You have to not be popular, conform to the norm. You have to do that to evolve, or to adapt, or make the mortgage payment, or like, you just have to do that. And what I don't want to do is two things. I don't want to teach my kids that, well, if something sucks, you just got to stay doing it. So like, if you're older and you're whatever, you're 25, you're out of school and you stumbled into this job and you hate it. Well, sorry, buddy, you signed up for it. You got to see it through for the next 30 years. Are you kidding me, bro? Right? Or vice versa.
Yeah.
So it's like, you have to rudder adjust, dude. Like, if you're not happy, if you're not in a place where you need to be, take a step out and change it. Having said that, just like Gabe's saying and we're saying, you got to give it a chance. Like, you have to put in the work. Don't expect to be at the front of the pack right away. If you want to get somewhere, you're going to start at the low end of the totem pole. Don't be entitled. Don't be overprivileged. Like, so again, there's that balance there. But I think that comes from helping kids process through that and critically think about, what does that look like? And I mean, even just for example, like, we're trying to help my son out with, like, he bought a Sur-On, which, Jason, you'd love these things. It's basically like a miniature electric dirt bike. They're ridiculous. But mom and dad are the bank, and he has to make payments to the bank. But how is he making money? How are kids his age? He's 14. Some kids are going down to the grocery store and they punch in and punch out, and they bag groceries and move carts around. And that's great. That's totally cool. That might not fit for my son. So what's he doing? He's washing bikes, and he's knocking on neighbors' doors and saying, hey, how can I help you? And they're saying, hey, I'll pay you to pull weeds and pour some mulch. And he'll do that. And then he might do like a little, one-on-one private session with a little kid to help them with mountain biking. And just like, even if he does go into a corporate job, just to get kids to think like, there are other ways for us to make money, to experience life, than just, I'll just go to the grocery store and get a job. What a cool experience for them. Not that either's right or wrong, but learn how to think outside the box and not just conform to the norm, man.
It's possibly the most valuable skill that you can have, right? Like, thinking outside the box, like thinking, okay, this is the assignment that I'm being given, and there's like a clear, like, black and white way to get there. Have you guys ever heard, I'll keep this short, of the story of, like, it was like a Stanford business professor or some big school. And the assignment was, he's giving everyone, $5, and who can make it, the most, flip it to the most money. And they'll present on that later. And one group went out and just tried to essentially do the flip thing, right? Like, buy one thing with $5, sell it for 10, so on and so forth, and keep going. That's what one person did. Then the other group ended up like, trying to figure out what's, the business that they could do. But the winning group, and this is kind of the punchline, the winning group figured out that this was all a distraction, that the real value was the fact that they were going to give a presentation in front of all these Stanford business students. So they went out and sold that as like commercial time to a business and said, hey, we'll use this presentation instead of saying how we made this money. We'll essentially present your business in front of this, audience that is your ideal audience. And they ended up winning the thing. And it's just, it's such a good example, right? Of like the type of thinking that it requires for you to be like, I'm given $5 and how can I turn this into the most in however much time they had, and it being something completely different than what you were given, realizing that it's that presentation you're going to give that's the real valuable thing. So cool example of what I think is one of the most important skills. And it's exactly what you're saying, just being able to think outside the box.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I love that, dude. I love that your son mountain bikes. I think that's so badass. Cause coming up, BMX racing, being on the gate and just, all right, riders, let's line them up.
Super intense.
Yeah. And man, it's just so intense and just hitting, I know downhill is a little bit different in single track and whatnot, but I still love that. I want to ask you about jiu-jitsu. So obviously I've been go ahead. Gabe.
Just before we get to the jiu-jitsu thing, I have a question about the mountain bike. And I think this is a really curious, parenting question. How do you balance, and has there ever,
I like it, Gabe.
And has there ever been any, conversation between you and Sarah about like picking something that is, inherently maybe not the safest thing, right? We have a really close friend that we work with that recently, knock on wood, don't want to jinx it, but had a pretty gnarly accident. My father-in-law had like a really, really gnarly accident. And actually the fact that he works out and the fact that, surgeons were like surprised when they went in there to fix a couple of things, just how easy it was given his age to like fix what they needed to fix. So that goes into how important exercise is. But has that ever been just something that you consider, have a conversation with your wife? How's that looked?
Yeah, it's a thing. But thankfully he's a very calculated kid. So you'll see sort of two kids fall into this category. Most kids that, in my experience, do more gravity-based stuff, they don't fit the mold of like your regular kid. A lot of them, they're too distracted in school. Like my son's got ADHD and anxiety with school. And so like the fast paced, like quick moving stuff, it's like really good, right? Because something else is coming at him, which is really rad. But so you'll see that a lot, right? But then you'll see these kids that will just like send it off anything, just like, let's go. And he's not like that. He is you couldn't talk him into doing something until he's ready. And so what's neat is as they progress and build the skill behind it, that it becomes trusting that. And where I have to let go is there are some times where he wants to do something where if you don't make it, the repercussions are high. If I miss this gap, bad things happen. If I crash in this rock garden, bad things happen. But because he's calculated and because no one else could talk him into it, he only does it when he's ready. That's very helpful. So we're just lucky with that. And also it's just, I don't look at it like the goal is to have him race World Cup. I look at it as I want when he and my daughter are in their late 20s and early 30s, if they have kids, I want them to still love riding bikes and be like, hey, Dad, do you want to come ride with us and the grandkids? And I'll be like, yes, that's a win. I would rather that than having my kids be like funneled into this elite thing to where they burn out when they're 19.
Do you feel like you fostered that in him at all, the calculated piece? Or is that just kind of like he's been like that kind of out of the box?
I think he's been like that. Yeah. And I'm actually surprised that he's more of a risk taker than he is. I was pretty shy with that stuff as a kid. And it's funny because he would always tell me like, Dad, biking's so much harder than wrestling. And I was like, tread lightly, son. Like that's not a true statement. And we were at this bike practice and he wanted to hit this drop. It was this like janky wooden thing. And it was big, like it was probably by the time you go off the ramp or the drop, the wood section and hit the drop, it's probably 10 or 12 feet. So it's like sizable enough. And he was on this little dirt jumper and he was probably, I don't know, 11, 10 at the time. He's like, Dad, I really want to hit it. I was like, this is outside of my thing. Talk to your coach. Like, he's the guy. If you're ready, your coach will tell you. And his coach was like, you got to talk him through it. And I was waiting at the bottom, and Rourke hit the drop, and he landed, and he met me down there, and he was shaking. His hands and his lips were shaking. And he's like, Dad, I did it. I did it. I was like, holy crap, that's what he means. Like, when he wants to make the next step, it's way riskier than what I was doing. Me, I just had to get my head pounded in for another 6 months and get beat up. It was physically harder, but what he's doing is there's more to overcome mentally as far as like an element of risk. So it's been interesting to experience that dynamic.
Oh, that's good.
Good. Well, I mean, hey, since Gabe brought it up, I'll just ask another follow-up question on this. So I came up racing BMX bikes, and I toured the country, and I was very into it. It was very good for me in that it taught me discipline. It taught me to overcome hurdles and challenges and that adversity of like being scared a little bit, right? Because there was dirt jumps that you'd be scared of. The racing I did wasn't as bad, but when you would get off the track and you hit dirt jumps, it gets scary. Like if you don't make the gap, like, dude, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
But it was very much so an individual sport. So I was on a team, like, you know, cause you get like kind of sponsors and stuff, but it was very much so individual. So I'm curious, like with your son in particular, do you also, are you okay with just doing mainly individual sports like skiing and biking? Or have you said, hey, we got to get him into some type of team sport as well?
It's a good question. Like it's just never really come up. And it's never been something that I feel like he's missed out. There's a real cool culture around his bike team. Mila, my daughter, she's done some more individual stuff as well, like figure skating. She hasn't really leaned into the team stuff as much. And I guess maybe that's partly because I grew up wrestling. It's individual, like your points are scored for the team, but it's very individual. And so I think with both of those things and with the mountain biking thing, what I found that is neat is there's a culture of progression where it wasn't like that with wrestling. You know, like if the three of us are both competing for a weight class, we're probably not going to be best friends because if you beat me, you just took my spot. Where when it's, you know, like the figure skating thing a little bit, but like skiing or gravity-based mountain biking, when it's some of these more action sports and not as, you know, ski racing and things like that, people are just stoked to see others progress. So if there's a group of kids around and somebody's feeling really good on a jump and they tow somebody else in and they hit it for the first time, everyone's like stoked and cheering for them. Right? It's not like, oh, they're catching up to me. It's like, no, like we're doing this. And so that's been, I think that mentality has kept me from feeling like they're missing a group environment where arguably like some of the team stuff, it can get pretty like, which there's value lessons to be learned there. But like, that's hard dynamic, man. Like you beat me, you take my spot. That's some real life stuff right there too.
Yeah. Dude, you know, do you remember that time, Chris? We went out for dinner after teaching a seminar and I had clam chowder and a whole food. And then you know what we did right after that? Because this has became world famous. And I had so many people. Up to me still and say, I did your hotel workout from hell or whatever it was.
Yes.
Dude. You remember that, dude?
I absolutely remember that.
That's another OG video that I remember watching and I remember doing it. I 100% like saw that video and was like, I need to try this. I bet you Liz can pull it up.
But there's got to be context to it because people who just see it online like, oh, this is a CrossFit workout that with Chris Spealler and Jason Khalipa, but they don't realize there it is.
Yes.
Oh, dude. I so remember this. It was like 20 minutes after you ate the clam chowder.
Just that's what people don't talk about. Nobody talks about that.
Nobody knows that you had just had a gigantic bowl of clam chowder. Oh my gosh. It was, I mean, that workout though, that workout is outstanding. even without the bowl of clam chowder.
Wait, so it was 100. Oh, that first 100 hang DB squat clean thrusters. And then every minute on the minute you do 5 burpees. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Dude.
So gnarly.
There's so much to unpack here. There's the outfit, there's the shorts,
the no shoes. I think it was because it was like at a different hotel that you weren't staying at. I forget what it was. Is there like a basketball game going on in the background there?
Dude.
That t-shirt too, that was from Forged. You remember that company that came out?
Yeah, Ryan with Forged. I mean, that was 2009. Yeah. But the part that people don't, no one knows is like, dude, this thing was gnarly, but it's just like, this is the way stuff went down back in the day. Like, look at that guy. He's just watching us. He's like, what's up, bro? But like, yeah, we were at dinner. I was wearing like regular shoes. And then we ended up coming in here and just crushing this. I don't even know how this even happened.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, the definition of just flying by the seat of your pants.
For the record,
I love it. Dropping the dumbbells in the hotel. I love it.
10:53. And
dude, that's like an iPhone 1.
Oh, I love it. That's so great. Such good stuff.
God, the clam chowder. I can only imagine. God,
the clam chowder.
And that makes me nauseous.
And Gabe, countless times, dude, we would be, working seminars together. And I'd be like, hey, Chris, you want to go do a workout? Like we did some stair workouts, like in stairwells. I used to run the stairs before the seminar. Remember those? Dude, just a lot of good times. But speaking of good times, great pivot to jiu-jitsu. So I had been talking to you about jiu-jitsu for a while. You and I think if I'm not mistaken, maybe in Hawaii one time, we had kind of like messed around with it a little bit, nothing crazy. And I'd always thought you'd be a great advocate for jiu-jitsu because this idea of progression, right? What drew me to CrossFit, what drew me to these different things is learning new skills. And now I'm really being inspired by tactical games and still jiu-jitsu. Do you think, if you could look back on it, do you think you should have started jiu-jitsu earlier? And how's that journey been? Because I know you and I had spoke about it a number of times, but it was just as of recently you got into it, right?
Yeah, maybe 6 months ago. So I wish I would have stuck with it when I first tried it, which was maybe a month out of college wrestling. And at the time I was like, this is dumb because it was slow and people could grab your clothes. And I was like, that's cheating and that's lame because like in wrestling, clothes to grab, bro. So like, you want to see what it's like to really do this? Take your freaking gi off. And that was like my mentality. And I was like kind of pissed because I just didn't appreciate it. I felt like it was cheating. And then I stayed away from it for so long, partly because I just wasn't interested. And then as I sort of got interested, I was like, I don't think this is going to go well with my personality. I'll have a high level of expectation for myself. Being a college wrestler, like, I just don't know if it's good. And it's funny you'll get a kick out of this, Jason. This goes to show like how much of a psycho I am still, the college wrestler mentality. You know what triggered me to think like, you know what, I should try it. You know what it was?
What was it?
I was at the Invitational this year and you were sitting in the lobby and I walked in and I was like, Khalipa has a little bit of cauliflower ear. And I was like, nah, he can't be the only one with that. Like, that's not fair. And I was like, dude, and that for whatever reason, I was like, nah, I'm going to get in the room and see how it goes.
No way.
And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to try it. So I actually reached out to Spencer Nix. I don't know if you know, Spencer's a good dude and he, runs a gym and he's been doing it for 7 or 8 years. And I think he's a really high level purple belt. So I was like, hey dude, if I'm going to do this, I know just like anything else, there's good gyms, bad gyms. I don't want to like have a bad experience. Tell me where to go. And he's great. He like looked around and found a school in Salt Lake that's relatively close to my house. And I went in and I tried it. And the guy was super nice. He was super chill. He's a little bit older guy. And he was chill and it's a great community. The guys, there's not many like chippy guys there, like you could get in an atmosphere like that. There's a lot of mentality of guys taking care of one another. They're not just trying to like break arms and ankles because that's just not cool. You got to take care of one another so you can have your training partner. And I have really, really enjoyed it. I really have to rethink through how I do things because it's very opposite from wrestling in some ways. but I've really enjoyed it, man. It's been a fun transition.
Gabe, another one, another, put another check mark.
I've said it multiple times. It's inevitable. I'll eventually do it for sure. Right now I'm trying to like, figure out these two tiny little humans.
Yeah.
And I have a gym set up right here. And it's funny, the other day, because we built out it's like 2/3 of it is our gym. 1/3 of it was going to be like a kid space, but of course our kid doesn't want to be there. He wants to be where we are. So I was like, man, I could put some mats back there eventually. Yeah. But anyway, we'll eventually get into it. It's fun.
Chris. So, a lot of people who listen to this show know that I have an interest in jiu-jitsu, been doing it a pretty long time. Just for clarity's sake, Chris comes from a high level wrestling background. Very high level, actually. The thing that sticks out to me the most is that movie. It was Hurt Locker, right? Was that what it was?
Oh yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You had one of your coaches was one of those guys, wasn't he?
I don't know if it was in Hurt Locker, but one of my coaches was he was third in the world and went to the Olympics twice. I mean, he's in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. He's insane.
Yeah. Whatever it was, you wrestled at a very high level. And when you came out, it's difficult to do something that's more combat based that, maybe will put you in, I commend you for being open-minded and humble enough to expose yourself to this, because wrestling and jiu-jitsu are very different. Wrestling, is it's not okay to be on your back. Jiu-jitsu, it's okay. It's not, it's okay. Yeah. But it just lays such a great framework. And I think even the fact that you're doing the gi instead of no gi is really interesting to me too, because you'd think you would gravitate more to no gi, only because you have less cloth to grab onto, kind of more like a wrestling singlet.
Yeah.
Which actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think wrestling is pivoting away from only the singlet and now allowing rash guards. I don't know if you've heard that same thing.
I think it's a lot of the high school kids, more of a level of comfort and things like that. But on the international stage, you'll still see singlets. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I just think so for the last 6 months getting into jiu-jitsu, for those people that are on the fence, we're listening to the way you train, and you and I train very similar in the sense, I probably do more weight training than you.
Yeah.
But what, Gabe? What are you smiling?
I'm laughing because you don't pare down your intensity at all. I don't think you guys train similar at all.
Shocker.
I'm laughing because it's we train very similarly. This guy's RP 10 every single time he does anything.
Yeah.
He was teaching a seminar the other day for Custom and Border Protection. He did the workout with them and went harder than anyone else. And he was just teaching something. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on you two having very similar training styles.
Yeah. But nonetheless, with grappling, I've found it to be this progression, this unlocking. I actually feel like I'm more athletic today than I was when I was just competing in CrossFit because of how dynamic jiu-jitsu is. And so I'm curious, what lessons have you learned on the mats that you could help outside the mats, and just in general, what is drawing you in there in particular?
I think I learned it from wrestling. There's just something about hand to hand, whether you want to call it combat or conflict or whatever. I just like it. It doesn't matter. I like coming home and having a black eye. I like having my cauliflower ear flare up. I like getting in a bit of a tussle and having it be intense. I like when I get smashed. And the room that we're in, there's just a lot of big dudes. There's very little. I can count on one hand how many guys are even close to my size. So I'm often rolling with guys that are 180, 190, 210. And I'm just there's one of the instructors, he's a black belt, he's 300 pounds. And I was I don't care. I'll roll. Let's go. Because I just look at it I'm just going to learn, right? And I don't mind being the nail. It's sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail. Even though that sucks, there's so much value there, dude, that you cannot learn anywhere else. I'm convinced of it. And whether you do it through wrestling, which I think is harder, you do it through jiu-jitsu, whatever it is, you cannot replicate that feeling, that conflict, the hand-to-hand. It doesn't matter, dude. CrossFit doesn't touch it. Yes, you can work hard. Yes, you can feel like you can puke, but that's different than when somebody's physically trying to say what it is, like hurt you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just think that, yeah, look at that hair, buddy. Oh yeah.
There's a picture of Chris up on the screen right now.
That's me. Yeah.
Old school.
And so I really like that. And so I've learned that from a really young age. Right. And so I would say to somebody that's looking at doing that, that you will probably unintentionally grow as a person and have so much more confidence in who you are. You'll be more humble, and you will, I think, be exposed to understanding, how do I say this? Like, for some people, like, one of two things. One, you're either not as tough as you think you are, or two, you will realize how vulnerable you were versus now. Because
how capable you are now.
Yes, because one thing that I took for granted that I didn't ever think about, and I didn't think about this till I was like probably like 5 or 6 years ago, because we had some people in the gym taking a self-defense class, and my wife was like, should I do that? Should I not? It was a women's type thing. And I was like, look, honey, it's cool that they're doing that, and that's great. But I was like, I'm just telling you right now that if they do that for the next, one class for the next 5 weeks, it's not going to do anything. Like, they might feel more comfortable, but God forbid anything happens, the crap hits the fan, like that has to be second nature. That's not like, hey, wait, hang on, let me put my arm here and do this. Like, it has to be second nature. So you have to train it frequently and often. And I was like, you know what? I just realized, like, and I'm not saying I'm like some super tough guy, but just from growing up wrestling, I've never been in a position in my life where I've thought, holy crap, what am I going to do if someone puts their hands on me? I've been in positions where I've been like, oh, this could get like a little out of hand, but never have I been like, what am I going to do? And I thought, holy crap, like that's not normal. Like I think most people would be like, what am I going to do? Because they didn't grow up wrestling or have 8 years of jiu-jitsu under their belt. Like, that is a huge confidence boost advantage on so many levels, levels.
Yeah, man. It just humbles you. Go ahead, Gabe.
Well, I was just going to say, on the flip side, because we talked about this on a previous podcast, I think that more dangerous, though, is the guys that think that they'll quote unquote rise to the occasion, though, and have no training. Because I think there are some guys that don't have that, like, what am I going to do? They're just like, oh, I can take care of this, but they have nothing to back that up, which I think is actually more dangerous than potentially having at least, I'm not trained and I know I'm not trained.
Yeah.
Spend 2 weeks on the mats. Like we put up a video yesterday with me and Tim Kennedy, and we were doing knife defense. And they threw some knives on the mat. We happened to be like working some strategy. And I've done some knife defense in grappling, maybe like 3 or 4 times, not that much, not like Tim. And we go at it, and he starts eye gouging me and doing all this stuff. And it's just like, it's really eye opening that if you don't have exposure to those type of things, like, you got to expose yourself. You have to expose yourself often so your body can react before you even know it. And I will say, for anybody who's interested in jiu-jitsu, give it like 6 months. I promise, give it 6 months and you will never look back. You'll never, ever look back. You're going to wish you had started beforehand, but the first 6 months are going to suck. So I appreciate you kind of being on the train with me, because I think there's just so much that we can unlock mentally and physically through it that I think is really exciting.
Totally. I highly recommend it. Even just to try it and go to a couple different schools. If one doesn't resonate, check out another one. Find a good community, just like you'd say at a gym. Like, find a good one and just give it a shot. Like, I think it's so valuable.
Dude, I love it, man. Well, I want to be sensitive of your time. This has been a really, really fun conversation. I feel like we could do another one just about like, just some like, oh man, I want to talk about faith. I definitely want to get into that with you in a future episode. I want to talk more about some like our fun moments at the CrossFit Games and different stuff like that. And dive in a little bit more about the kids, understand with wrestling, that was a huge part of your life. Like, what lessons you had learned through that. I think that those are some things I'd love to touch on Chris Spealler on the Jason Khalipa Podcast episode 2, if that's cool with you.
Anytime, man.
Gabe, any kind of closing remarks here?
No, these are so fun. It's funny. If you would have told me, a few years ago, I'd be on a podcast with Chris Spealler and Jason Khalipa, I would have been pretty fired up. So it's cool to be here.
Oh man. Well, Chris, for anybody who's interested in kind of, maybe they're out there in Park City, maybe they want to come by, see your gym, they want to go, do whatever. We'll put in the podcast show notes, your IG, but is there anywhere else that's somewhere that maybe they could find you? Anything you got going on that you want to let people know about?
Yeah, that's really it. Checking out the gym. We're in Park City. I'm super passionate about just helping people, I think, more and more on an individual basis now. Had an online thing for a while. And while, I love the people that are a part of that community, a lot of the emphasis has just been like, hey, how can I really help people on an individual basis? So I've developed some programs where I do stuff like that, where it's customized programming for people, looking at like really the whole person. We look at 4 buckets where it's sleep, nutrition, obviously movement, and then we call it life experience. It's a lot of the stuff we're talking about here. How do those things interact with one another? How do we find ways to balance that stuff? So anyway, that's just some fun stuff that I have going on with a lot of people here in person, and some online as well. And then other than that, man, if you guys are ever in town, if you're ever in Park City, you want to ride bikes, whatever, don't hesitate to reach out. Hit us up. It's fun putting our fitness to use outside the gym, and happy to connect.
Dude, I love that. Well, I think I'm gonna be out in your way for the tactical games. Are in September. I believe they're in Utah. And
yeah, they are. I was thinking about doing that, but I think I got a trip planned to Whistler for mountain biking instead.
Oh boy. Well, until next time, brother, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. For everybody listening, simple ask, right? If you received value from Chris Spealler from this conversation and you had a takeaway, share it with a friend. Let someone else in on kind of the message that we're really trying to share here through the Jason Khalipa podcast, this idea of train, protect, provide, level ourselves up as husbands, fathers, and whatever role you play in your life. Keep training hard. We'll see you again next week. Let's go.